Welcome to Live Without Limits. Transform your thinking to redesign your life. I'm Davida Shinsky, and today, we dive deep into an understanding ourselves and, and okay, let's start over. Today, we dive deep into understanding ourselves, healing our stories, and creating lives that feel true to who we are. I'm so grateful that you're here today because today's logic is one of the touches all of us, no matter where we come from. And that's how our family and cultural background shape the people we become. We're talking about nature nurture. We're talking about your faith and religion. We're talking about your family and their values. From the moment we're born, we're influenced by the world around us. The family we grow up in teaches us through words, actions, and sometimes silence what to believe about ourselves, about others, and about the world. Our culture, with its traditions, values, unspoken rules, weaves itself into our identity also, shaping our dreams, our fears, even the way we love to define success. But here's something important to remember as we move through this conversation. Now, before I go any further, what I want to say is if you look at transactional analysis that was founded by Eric Berne in the 20th century, we're talking about the adult, the parent, and the child. The child says, I want. The parent says, you should. The adult says, I am able to. And the messages that you hear as a child become the messages that you repeat in your head. So if you have negative thoughts, usually they were put on there by someone else, whether a teacher, a parent, because I can tell you, I come from a family where it was very toxic. My father came from a home where there was a lot of physical abuse. My mother came from a home where there was a lot of psychological abuse. And when you put those two together, it's a very toxic environment. And growing up with a disability and being constantly bombarded by negativity, you can understand why I had far more to overcome. And I'm at an age now where you start hearing about people you went to school with pass away. And I can remember that because I grew up in an era before there were laws guaranteeing people with disabilities the right to an education or the right to employment, I was always ostracized. And I knew all these people, but we were never friends. Even though I grew up in a community that was relatively small, considering, and we went to school with people from elementary school on. You would think things would have changed, but it didn't. So therefore, recently, when I saw where someone I knew had passed away at the beginning of the year, it was like, oh, okay. We were, even though we knew each other and from elementary school on, we were never close. And so it was, sad to hear, but at the same time, it didn't totally affect me because we were not real friends that I would call friends. So let's talk about something important to remember as we move through this conversation. This isn't about blaming. It's not about pointing fingers at families, our cultures, or our past. It's about understanding because awareness is the first step toward empowerment. When we understand how we've been shaped, we gain the ability to keep what strengthens us, to heal what hurts us, and to consciously create the kind of life that reflects who we truly are, not just who we were taught to be. And I guess this is a perfect place to talk about this. Carl Jung said, "It is not what happened to me, it is what I choose to become." And this is a philosophy I live by because had I bought into what my family wanted me to do, I would have sat in my mother's house, never had a job, and did nothing but just sit around watching TV like she did, or maybe reading a book. That was the extent of what she thought I could do, and I chose to live the life I wanted to live, and therefore, because I didn't go along with her dictates, she refused to help me, even though she could financially. And it was not that I asked her for anything, but here's the kicker. When I sat down with her and talked to her about the kind of business I wanted to run and what I wanted to do, first thing, she didn't hear about what I wanted to do. And I never mentioned this, but the first thing she thought about was I wanted her money. Never asked her for a dime, and knew living with her was so toxic, I was better off in the street than being in the house with her. Because I remember being that 12-year-old child being hit every day because a perceived wrong that I did. And I remember climbing at 12 years old out of the window of the bedroom and wanting to run away. Only thing is, I had no place to go. And you didn't have the laws then that you have today, where you can call up and say you're being abused and tell someone what's going on and get the help you needed. So remember, it's up to you to decide what you want to do and choose for yourself. Because often what you see is parents want to relive their life through their children, especially if they see those children having the ability to achieve something in an industry that they want to be in, whether or not that child wants to. And even when the child starts to grow up and think for themselves and want to choose their own path, the first thing they do is dissuade you because you're taking away their meal ticket, their success. They don't see it as your success. They see it as their own success. So remember, you have to live your life, not your parents' life, whether they like it or not. So today, we're going to explore how family mirrors and molds us, how culture expands or limits us, and how we can honor our roots while still giving ourselves permission to grow beyond them. You're exactly where you need to be, and I'm excited to take this journey with you. So let's dive in. Let's start by talking about one of the most powerful forces in shaping who we become: family. Your family shapes your early identity. Your family is often your very first mirror. From your earliest days, the people around you reflect back messages about who you are, what is expected of you, and what normal looks like. You learn, often without even realizing it, what emotions are acceptable, what success means, how conflict is handled, and even how much you are allowed to shine. Family shapes us in some very specific ways, especially in these areas. Core beliefs. Your family teaches you foundations, beliefs about life, like what love looks like, what it means to be successful, and who can be trusted, and how to deal with failure. Were you taught that love is unconditional or something you had to earn? Were you taught the mistakes are part of living or something to be ashamed of? These early beliefs often become the unconscious rules that we live by until we stop and question them. Emotional patterns. Families also teach us how to handle emotions. Did you grow up within a home where anger was explosive, or one where anger was silent and simmering? Was sadness comforted or expressed or ignored and dismissed? Was joy celebrated or treated with suspicion, like it might not last? The way emotions were handled in your family becomes the blueprint for how you handle your own emotions, and sometimes how you react to others' emotions. And that's the big one, because if your family is very cold and unresponsive to you as a child, and children need to know they're loved, they need to be hugged, they need to be kissed, they need to be feel as though they're wanted, because if they're feeling unwanted, that shapes them also. Rules and expectations. Every family tends to assign rules, whether intentionally or unintentionally. You might have been the responsible one, the caretaker, the peacemaker, the rebel, or even the invisible one. Now, also, let me tell you this much. If you look at assessment profiles, and I use the disc that you can look at, the D is the dominant personality who likes to control everything. The I is the person who has very good interpersonal skills. The S is the steadiness, the person who literally goes by the book and is also the one that tries to be the peacemaker in the family. And the C, that's the conscientiousness person, but that's the person that questions everything until they know all the answers. And here's some things that go along with this. So these roles come with powerful expectations. You're the strong one. You can't show weakness. You're the successful one. You can't fail. You're the troublemaker. No one expects better from you. And this ties into the adult, the parent, and the child, because these are the messages that you're hearing from your parents, that they deem someone, especially if you look at in school, not everyone learns at the same pace. Not everyone learns the same way. And therefore, just because someone does poorly on a test does not mean they're learning something. It just means that they didn't, their way of learning, their way of applying what they learn may be very different. And if you're basing it on the grades that someone has, and the troublemaker can very easily be someone who didn't get the love, the respect from the parents as a young child, and so they acted out just to get some type of response to them, and because it did, it reinforces that bad behavior. Therefore, parents in a way need to learn how to show love and respect to their children, especially if they expect their children to love and respect them. And that means understanding that when they're hurting, give them that hug they need. Show them. And if someone acts out, let them know that's inappropriate behavior and reinforce them when they do something that's good. So remember, a lot of this comes from the messages you're being given. And this is why in Eric Berne's transactional analysis, it's important to understand. And if you look at the laws of attraction, when you look at what's positive behavior and what's negative behavior, and if you're putting out bad vibes, that's what's coming back to you. But if you put out the good vibes and you treat people right, it will come back to you. So understanding this, but remember who you are as a child, how you learn in that family, that's how you're going to be as an adult. That's why early on in the 20th century, early on, you didn't see divorces because women allowed themselves to be constantly be abused. And it really wasn't towards the baby boomer generation that was the late 50s. They were born starting after World War II, and it went to 64. But that was an age group where you saw a very high rate of divorce because the roles they played were the roles they saw in the family. And as the 60s came about and as more awareness came about, then what was happening is you saw kind of a revolution in a way of individuals. And the baby boomer generation, many women were limited in the types of jobs they could get, whereas today almost anything is open to anyone. And working from home has become a norm. Starting your own business online has become the norm. So understanding where you come from affects how successful you are later in life. So sometimes we live into these roles for years without realizing how much they limit or define us. So here's where it gets really important. Family dynamics don't just create roles, they create internal narratives. And that's what you hear in your head. They shape the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and what we're capable of. Stories like, I have to be perfect to be loved. I'm the one who always has to fix everything. I'm the failure. I'll never measure up. These stories are powerful because until you see them clearly, they quietly run our lives. But once we bring them into awareness, we can start rewriting them. Wow. Yeah. Now, you hear that? That is, I have that on my phone because because I had to be the one to choose how I live my life. And I did not, and that song resonates with me simply because I chose my own path, even though I was constantly being told, you're helpless, you're worthless, you can't live on your own, you can't hold a job. So when they told me I can't, it was important to me because I grew up with a disability at a time when there were no laws that gave me any rights, that it was important for me to succeed. And and in essence, I became a disabilities rights advocate. And that's also a domain name I use for my website. But remember this, who you are is determined by who you want to be. That's why I have that saying on my computer that Carl Jung says that it's not what happened to me, but what I choose to become. Because if you choose to succeed and believe in yourself and learn to encourage yourself and learn to pat yourself on the back, even when you have family that don't, then you can take and do whatever you choose to do. So these stories are powerful because until we see them clearly, they quietly run our lives. But once we bring them into awareness, we can start to rewrite them. We can honor where we come from and also choose a different path if we want to. So, how culture expands or limits your worldview. Now, I can also tell you that I was born in 1951. And back then, it wasn't until the late 60s, early 70s that you started seeing laws that started changing how society treats its disability community. Because prior to then, it was all about they don't exist. And I can tell you, when I was in school, I was the one that was teased that I was different. And also, I think your faith or your religion dictates how you see education. And because I grew up in the faith where education was very important, because it's how you pass the teachings on and the religion on, that I was in school while most people with disabilities never got an education at that time, which opened doors for me that probably wouldn't have been open, but it was also that I had to kick the doors in, because one of the reasons I started my own business was because I couldn't find gainful employment. And I knew I had something to give. That's why I started my podcast over 17 years ago, when podcasting was in its infancy and the term podcast hadn't even been invented yet. So your family is often your very first mirror. From the earliest days, the people you reflect back messages from and about who you are, what is expected of you, and what normal looks like. You learn often without even realizing it. What emotions are acceptable, what success means, how conflict is handled, and even how much you are allowed to shine. Family shapes us in some very specific ways, especially in these three areas. Your core beliefs. Your family teaches you foundational beliefs about life, like what love looks like, what it means to be successful, who can be trusted, and how to deal with failure. Were you taught that love is unconditional or something you had to earn? Were you taught that mistakes are part of learning or something to be ashamed of? These early beliefs often become the unconscious rules we live by until we stop and question them. Remember, Freud called it the id, the ego, and the superego. And it was the superego was that unconscious behavior, and getting it from the unconscious behavior into the conscious behavior is how you can change, because you have to become aware of your choices and the way you handle things, and then you have to decide whether or not you want to continue being that person or whether or not you want to be someone different. Emotional patterns. Families also teach us how to handle emotions. Did you grow up in a home where anger was explosive, or one where anger was silent and simmering? Was sadness confronted or comforted and expressed, or ignored and dismissed? And I can remember once I was in my bedroom crying, and my mother came in and said to me, "Why are you crying? You have no reason to cry." That's like ignoring and dismissing my right to feel hurt. And all I really needed from her was comfort. But she didn't know how to give it because it wasn't given to her as a child. And this is why often when we seem cold and disconnected, it's because we don't know how to show that emotional feelings. The way emotions are handled in your family becomes the blueprint for how you handle your own emotions, and sometimes how you react to others' emotions too. Roles and expectations. Every family tends to assign roles, whether intentionally or unintentionally. You might have been the responsible one, the caretaker, the peacemaker, the rebel, or even the invisible one. And those roles come with powerful expectations. You're the strong one. You can't show any weakness. You're the successful one. You can't fail. You're the troublemaker. No one expects better from you. Sometimes we live into these roles for years without realizing how much they limit or define us. When when you act a certain way in public and it becomes acceptable behavior, or you see things, and we're seeing this right now in the United States with what's going on in the presidency, and the culture that he's creating around it. And that's because it has been mentioned what went on in his family, what his father was like, and how he learned to adapt to getting what he wanted, and then thinking he can treat and bully other people into doing what he wants them to do. So remember that you're seeing it as it's going on right now. And here's where it gets really important. Family dynamics don't just create rules, they create internal narratives. They shape the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and what we're capable of. Stories like, I have to be perfect to be loved. I'm the one who's always has to fix everything. I'm the failure. I will never measure up. These stories are powerful because until we see them clearly, they quietly run our lives. And remember this, this is why parents of very young children, they can't reason with themselves. But as a child gets older and as they get a certain age, it's more important that they're given more responsibility, because by allowing them to have that responsibility as they get older, they learn how to handle things in a much more responsible way. But once we bring them into awareness, we can start to rewrite them. We can honor where we came from and also choose a different path if we want to. Recognizing what you've inherited and what you can redefine. As we explore the powerful ways family and culture shape us, it's important to remember something freeing. Not everything we inherit needs to be kept. We all carry beliefs, traditions, and emotional problems that were passed down to us, sometimes without question. Some of these inheritances are beautiful gifts, values like resilience, community, loyalty, or love. But others might be burdens, limiting beliefs, emotional wounds, or patterns of fear that no longer serve who we are becoming. And part of growing into your true self is learning to tell the difference. How do you know which family and cultural beliefs to keep and which to question? It all starts with reflection. Ask yourself, what core beliefs about myself come from my upbringing? Think about the messages you received earlier, either directly or indirectly, about your worth, your abilities, your place in the world. Which of these beliefs still serve me? Maybe more, maybe you were taught that hard work matters, and that belief still fuels your passion and purpose today. Which beliefs hold me back? Maybe you were taught that vulnerability is weakness, and now that belief keeps you isolated, even when you crave deeper connection. Learning to sort through your inherited beliefs isn't about rejecting your family or culture. It's about honoring your roots and giving you permission to grow beyond what no longer fits. You can love and respect your background while still choosing a different story for your life. You can carry forward the strength of where you came from without carrying the pain, the fear, or the limitations that came with it. Growing doesn't mean earning your past, it means integrating it, choosing the pieces that empower you, healing the, the pieces that hurt you, and consciously creating a future that reflects your deepest truth. So let's talk about embracing roots and freedom. As we wrap up today's conversation, I want to leave you with this thought. You can respect where you came from and still create your own path. You don't have to reject your family, your culture, or your past in order to grow. Healing doesn't always mean walking away. Sometimes it means integrating. It means taking what strengths you and healing what you hurt you and choosing with intention who you want to become. You are not bound to repeat the old patterns just because you inherited them. You have the power to honor your roots and still stretch, expand, and evolve beyond them. So this week, I want to encourage you to explore your family and cultural stories with curiosity and compassion. Ask yourself, what did my family or my culture teach me about who I am? Which parts of that story feel true and empowering today? Which parts am I ready to rewrite? And this is important. You can rewrite your story. You can become the person you want to be, but you have to make the choice because no one can force you to change your behavior. Only you can decide that you want to. Because when you explore your past with compassion, you stop being trapped by it and you start becoming the conscious author of your future. You get to decide who you are, what you believe, what kind of legacy you want to leave behind. So thank you for being here with me today, for being willing to ask the deeper questions, and for showing up for your own growth. And if this episode resonated with you, I would love for you to share it with someone else who might be on their own journey of honoring their roots and creating their future. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe because we are just getting started on this path of self-discovery and empowerment. So until next time, take a deep breath, trust your inner wisdom, and remember, you are free to become who you are always meant to be. And remember, you can live the life you choose to want to live.